Alright guys, so in this video we're going to take a look at how can we distribute our nutrition across the day in order to promote maximum muscle growth outcomes. So this is really if you're in a phase where you're trying to grow muscle. So the goal is not fat loss, the goal is muscle growth. Call it a bulk, call it a building phase, whatever you want to call it, does not matter. The goal is muscle growth. We're going to take our prescribed calories and macros, and is there a way we can distribute that across the day in order to promote best results? Now, the first conversation we want to have is about maximizing muscle protein synthesis. It's very obvious now that having our meals spread into, or our protein plus calories from other areas, if we spread that across at least 4 meals a day, it seems to maximize muscle protein synthesis for most people on average. So, want to make sure that you're having at least 4 meals a day. You could take the same calories and macros, but just have 2 meals a day, and it's very obvious that it just wouldn't produce the same results. So if we want maximum results, which obviously you're going to work really hard in the gym, you're going to want to maximize your results to a certain degree, have at least 4 meals a day, and that seems to cover you in terms of that consideration. Now, I do think that there's also something to be said for having more frequent meals in that, say for example, you have a bodybuilder who's 120 kilos, really strong, potentially not natural, maybe eating 5,500 calories, they might need to spread it over 5 meals and potentially a snack. At that point, it's important to understand that really we're catering for digestion there, as opposed to catering for muscle protein synthesis outcomes, and that again will be very relative to the individual. So relative to the individual, preferentially, or for digestive health, we could increase the frequency of meals, but only really when you're working with individuals who are consuming high quantities of food. So again, it's just a little bit individual there. So that would be the first topic of conversation to be had. I think as long as you're doing that, as long as you're having 4 meals a day at least, and preferentially if you want more, then that's cool as well. As long as you're doing that, then the next thing we want to look at is how can we evenly spread these across the day in order to have stable energy levels, good cognitive function, and essentially great performance throughout the day as well. Now, how we would do this is essentially make sure that every one of our meals features protein, carbs, and fats, or at least at certain times of the day, and we're timing how much of each we're consuming relative to what we're doing at that particular point of the day. So say for example, you're an individual who you go to bed at 9 p.m, your last meal is scheduled for 7:30 p.m, and you just notice that having a lot of carbohydrates in the evening or too close to bed means you get a big influx of brain energy and you just struggle to sleep. You might want to opt for a higher amount of fats and protein just relative to you and your schedule when it comes to your last meal, and if that works for you to promote sleep, that can definitely be a consideration. So before I go to this example, the composition of macronutrients will change throughout the day depending on you as an individual and what you're getting up to. But generally speaking, in order to have stable energy levels and feel your best, you want to have a distribution of protein, carbs, and fats in every single meal. And what I found works best for a lot of my clients is operating in a way that is, let's say for the first 3 or 4 meals throughout the day, you have protein, you have carbohydrates in a decent quantity, and some healthy fats in there in order to stabilize blood sugars. And then in the evening, as I said, you reduce the carbohydrates. You don't need to eliminate them, but reduce the carbohydrates so you're not having a huge portion of carbohydrates too close to bedtime, and you're just tapering it off and having a bit of healthy fats and some protein for some overnight muscle protein synthesis. I find that's a really good way of promoting good energy levels throughout the day, but then also ensuring somebody can actually sleep. So an example of this would be, let's say I'm going to prescribe somebody 5 meals a day. The first 4 meals would feature protein, because every time we eat, really we should be having protein. The first 4 meals are going to have protein, they're going to have a bit of healthy fats, and they're going to have some carbohydrates. Each meal might have varying amounts of carbohydrates, but really fundamentally that's what they have. And then your last meal before bed might not be the biggest meal in the world, because I would argue most people would benefit from not stuffing their face too close to bedtime. Then, because it'll impact their sleep, then we're looking at something that's a bit higher in protein and fats, maybe a bit lower in the carbs. That's not true for everybody, but a bit lower in the carbs, and just not a huge portion that's going to disrupt sleep. That would be a consideration there, because indirectly we're promoting muscle growth by actually just sleeping well and therefore maximizing the muscle growth processes while you sleep. So that'd be a consideration. Now, I talked about slightly varying amounts of carbohydrates and macros throughout the day. Understand, in this example, the first 4 meals throughout the day, they do feature fats, carbohydrates, and protein. But say, for example, you train at 1 p.m, you have your breakfast at 7 a.m, you have meal number 2 at 11:30, and then you go and train, and then you meal number 3 after you train and all that sort of good stuff. You'd probably want to time the majority of your carbohydrates for pre and post workout in order to just feel your best in terms of immediate energy supply. Now, we do also know that when it comes to being in a calorie surplus, meal timing is not quite as important for training performance as it is when it comes to being in a fat loss phase where calories are restricted. Because in that case, calories are restricted, therefore energy is restricted. So when you time that energy, injection matters a little bit more than when you're generally eating a ton of calories anyway. So if you're in a calorie surplus, you're in a building phase, you're eating a ton of calories anyway, it's more about how many calories you had the day before, to be perfectly honest. But anecdotally, and with most of my clients, if we do time a pretty big carbohydrate meal pre-workout, it doesn't need to be immediately pre-workout, but within a couple of hours before your workout, people typically perform a little bit better. They seem to have a bit more aggression to them. Now also, because we're going to deplete muscle stored glycogen during your workout, it's important to have, my opinion, it's important to have quite a high carbohydrate meal post-workout as well. Obviously, we're all featuring a little bit of fats and a bit of protein in each meal. A bit of protein in each meal because we want an even distribution and circulation of protein in order to hopefully maximize muscle protein synthesis. Carbohydrates may vary depending on your workout window and when you feel the best having them, but generally speaking, this is the structure we're going for. So now in this example, we've got 5 meals a day. You've got the last meal that's a bit of a smaller meal with it's primarily protein and fats with maybe a little bit of carbs, and the other 4 meals that really you're just having a look at when you're working out and when you need the carbs or when you feel best on the carbs, but really they have carbs, fats and protein, and they would be your main sort of meals. Now we've covered almost every box of maximizing muscle protein synthesis, evenly distributing your protein throughout the day, plus other macros. We've protected your sleep, we've looked after your training performance, and all that sort of good stuff as well. Really, I would say that that covers the majority of the points. We can definitely get lost in the weeds of trying to be over particular with meal timings, and there definitely was this culture back in the day where people thought that meal timings mattered way more than people have come to learn that they do these days. But I think in order to make sure that a person feels their best, performs their best, has the most stable energy levels, has the best sleep, and then also maximizes muscle protein synthesis, really what we're looking for is at least 4 meals a day. We're looking to make sure that sleep is protected by not having way too many calories too close to bed. You might want to experiment with that. Some people feel better on a smaller meal. Some people can eat whatever they want before bed and they're totally fine. Definitely not me. But that could be something you want to experiment with. Generally speaking, your last meal before bed, something light, high protein, high fats, with not too many carbs works best. The rest of your meals should feature carbohydrates, protein and fats. And that should be spread out throughout the day and really timed in a way that's going to give you the best energy relative to your workout window. And if you're doing all those things, you can't really go wrong. As a side note, I keep mentioning fats. I think it's important to understand the application of fats. Everybody knows about protein. Everybody knows carbs are energy. But fats, and why I keep referencing stable energy levels throughout the day, you want to make sure that you've got a dedicated healthy fat source in every meal, in my opinion, because what we know about eating a lot of carbohydrates is there will be spikes in blood sugar, which sounds very aggressive. It's not as aggressive as it sounds. There'll be spikes in blood sugar, and oftentimes this can cause subsequent fatigue crashes, and in order to smooth that off, then digesting your food with some healthy fats in every single meal will really help that. And you'll find in doing so, your energy levels will feel much better. A lot of people feel way more satiated, and cognitive function can even be way better. So directly, when it comes to distributing your food throughout the day, with regards to muscle growth, there can be a short list of major considerations, and everything else are indirectly influencing how good an individual feels. And we can optimize that and make them feel their best to indirectly grow a bit more muscle, train better, perform better, recover better. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions that are a bit more relative to you as an individual, don't hesitate to drop them in the group and I will chat to you in the next one.